Hi, everybody. So, this week and next, we are going to tackle Rome and Roman culture and Roman art. And so, in this particular video, I want to introduce Rome to you. So, what do I mean by that? Well, Rome is a city, a physical city that you can visit today. Well, were it not for COVID, but the idea is it's a city. It is also was a republic. It was an empire. And lastly, it became something kind of lumped in with Greece and kind of categorized as classical. Okay, so let's just start basic. Here it is. That star kind of designates, roughly speaking, where Rome is located. So just as we were last week looking at the Etruscans, we're talking about this boot-shaped hunk of land sticking out in the Mediterranean. And you'll recall from last week, the Mediterranean was this extraordinary kind of superhighway in which boats and were moving people and ideas and items and all kinds of stuff. Okay, so it started as a city, and when we think of the city of Rome today, you might think of the Colosseum or temples like, say, the Pantheon, not to be confused with the Parthenon. But between these sort of monuments that have survived from the period of ancient Rome, there was and still remains to a degree a kind of web of connections. And what do I mean by that? The city of Rome is very much originally a series of civic spaces. I think even more than the Greeks, Romans were very conscious of how to organize space within a city to do a number of things. So in the case of the Roman Forum, one of those things was a kind of center to the city. And the Forum, as originally conceived, was a civic center that would have a couple of temples, would have a physical space where decision makers would gather, and would also have public open space around those structures. And I guess that's what I mean by a kind of web of understanding, is that Romans really saw external space as interrelated, that is outdoor space, related to their buildings. Now, I want to just pause at this point and bring up the thing about Rome. Rome today. You can have here the remains of an ancient Roman building, and it has the telltale columns, and Roman buildings tend to be up on what are called plinths or high platforms. But what's that in the background? Well, that would be a 17th century building. And the thing about Rome is, in its continuous habitation, culture after culture after culture just built and filled in and sometimes tore down and rebuilt and so forth. So it's not at all uncommon in Rome today to have ancient parts, kind of bump up against Renaissance and Baroque and later monuments of later periods. Okay, so back to our forum. So this conscious making of urban space where you would have a whole host of different kinds of buildings and then spaces around them for people to gather. And one of the favorite things you did when you gathered in the Roman Forum, if you're hanging out outside, is you listened to people give speeches. So all those of you who have to take speech communication classes for a requirement, say, to go to the CSUs, well, that started in Rome. The value given to what was called oratory, or the act of giving a speech to an audience. And so the Roman Forum was absolutely a setting for people to get up on something called a rostrum and deliver their opinion of the latest, latest issue in politics, latest, what's the best poem, whatever. Okay, so a little bit of history. Rome, believed to have been founded in 753 by two brothers, Romulus and Remus. They were raised by a wolf. Romulus kills Remus. So we have that kind of trope, or that story that we see in the Bible and here, and we're actually going to talk about it next week with Roman emperor. But that idea of two brothers trying to share power, and one always has to conquer the other one. The other important thing about Romulus and Remus is that they were believed to be the twin sons of Mars, who's the Roman god of war. So that's going to tell you a little bit of something about Roman culture, in that it is going to be tied to military, using the military to kind of expand. Okay. They also, by the way, the Romans thought they were descended from the Roman goddess Venus. So they had some pretty lofty ideas about themselves, really, from the get. What we know is that something that kind of coalesced into a city of Rome started as some settlements on what are called the Seven Hills on the river known as the Tiber. And we know that pretty early on, as these little settlements kind of merged into a city, this city, which is tied by the Mediterranean to Greece, started kind of adopting a lot of Greek ideas around myths and Greek religion. The Romans are going to add their own little flourish later, and we'll talk about that more next week. But yeah, they're going to make their emperors gods eventually. So even though we have only kind of traces of Rome as as an ancient city, there is this extraordinary model that one can see in the city of Rome that kind of recreates this center, this city Rome at its kind of height. And you do get, I think, a sense of the grandeur. Romans were builders. They dug building everything from, in the lower right corner, you might be seeing the Colosseum there. In the lower left is the Hippodrome. You can see the Tiber River over in the upper left of this image. So there were forums, and then there were monumental structures for meeting, for entertainment, and all the while thinking about constantly sort of celebrating Rome. Like from the beginning, Rome was like, gosh, we are awesome. And so we're going to organize ourselves. We're going to organize our urban space. We're going to organize our buildings to just kind of exclaim that at every turn, how powerful we are, how awesome we are, and so forth. Okay, so this is Rome as a city, bits and pieces of which we can still see today. Rome was also a republic. And as such, we're talking about between the years 509 and 27 BCE. So the overlap there is between the city of Rome and the Etruscans. And in 509, the last Etruscans were kind of kicked out, and Rome kind of took over all of Italy, that boot-shaped bit of land. And beginning in 509, the oligarchy, which is a bunch of rich old guys, became the decision makers, the rule makers. And so hence the notion of a republic, and they sat in chamber and they would deliberate on laws and pass laws. So this was a time that the older one was, and in this case, this really applies to men, though we have some examples of portraits of women. The older you were, the better, in a sense, and especially in the realm of politics, where now we are simply talking about men, that age was seen as a benefit, as a boon to a politician, because if you were an older person, you'd had experience, you had a level of wisdom and knowledge, and you were good at, applying precedent and what did we do in the past. And in fact, if you read these guys, these Republican Romans, there's a lot of talking about the past, and it's a lot of, gosh, do you remember how much better things were in the past? So if you think that's an idea that's new to kind of your world or your culture, your everyday exchanges with maybe people a little older than you, have no fear. People have been glorifying the past for a long time. So here's a portrait, and we are going to talk more about portraiture in another lecture, but I just bring this in because this is the kind of quintessential Roman Republican virtue, is age and a very warts and all, hey, are you old? I'm going to depict you old approach to portraiture, which if you think about Greek images, sculpted images of a couple of weeks ago, they were much more into kind of idealizing the form. We call this, by the way, verism, and we will pick this up in the lecture on portraiture. Okay. So in any case, the other aspect of the Roman Republic is bolded here in that last bullet point. This is when Rome began expanding around the Mediterranean. And I mean expanding far and wide using the military and setting up their own kind of cities. You know, they kind of took over existing cities, set up their own cities, kind of locked down the trade in the Mediterranean by using the military, but then allowing, for the most part, allowing various culture, the various different cities in these rather vast, spread out parts of the Mediterranean, kind of letting them get on with things. The Romans were sort of like, hey, everybody, we know you don't necessarily want our language and all our customs. You can keep a lot of your customs. We're going to expect you, though, to pay us taxes, but we'll protect you. And not only will we protect you, said Rome, because we got this military, but actually we're going to bring you some benefits. So this red arrow here indicates the southern part of France. And in the southern part of France, we have evidence from this period, the Republican period, of Rome's influence. Rome was, you know, very committed to, as it was spreading out during this period of the Republic, bringing the amenities from the city of Rome to its sort of areas it occupied. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm showing you the Pont de Garde, which is in southern France. So you might say, oh, that's awesome, a bridge. And you wouldn't be wrong, it is a bridge, but it's actually more than a bridge. It is an aqueduct. And its entire design, again, engineered by Romans, was to bring fresh water from hills, mountains, where there were streams, and in some cases, in the winter, snow, and using a kind of gradual, a physical channel that you used the topography and gravity to help move water from those upper reaches down into cities. So even as Rome is like, hey, Arles, in southern France, you're now part of us. They also brought in their engineering prowess, and they kind of expanded using things like aqueducts, using things like roads, and bringing sewers and so forth. So when Romans spread, they brought all their good ideas with them. And one of the things that made all of this possible was the use of the arch, which I'm kind of indicating here. And we talked briefly about the arch last week with the Etruscans. The Romans are going to run with the arch. And we're going to see this again in another lecture, kind of unpacked a bit, but just, stay tuned. Okay, eventually, though, Rome becomes an empire. So it was already sort of locking down the Mediterranean, but it went even further than that and spread as far as, and this map is not even showing you all of the empire. It goes up as far as Scotland to the north, over into Asia Minor, into North Africa. And the difference here is not just now they're kind of taking over Roman, over cities, but now what distinguishes the Republic from the empire is we're going to move into having an absolute ruler. So I bring back a Republican dude, and notice, he's kind of that verism. He's shown very realistically. His cheeks are a little hollowed. His brow is a bit wrinkled. This happens as you age. Well, what happens in Roman art, however, is we move away from depicting sort of individual politicians, such as you see here, and it's going to become all about the emperor. And here is Augustus, and it's a particular portrait of Augustus, who was the first emperor of Rome. It was found near the first gate, or Prima Porta. So not only are we going to see a kind of shift in the Roman Republic in terms of a real focus on emperors and portraying emperors, but we're also going to see architecture as an expression of Romanness. So even as Romans are taking their culture and spreading it far and wide, as I say, up to Great Britain and over to Asia Minor, they're bringing with them their architecture. So yes, aqueducts, sure, but now as these cities are officially part of the Roman Empire, these cities are going to have their own kind of Roman imprint. So here is a city in North Africa known as Timgad. We could look at Arles and the Roman, you can possibly discern the Roman parts of the city of Arles in France, or in Syria, Palmyra. So we will see as the Roman Empire spreads, whatever started in the city of Rome in terms of amenities and particular kinds of structures and particular designs of urban space will be replicated all over the empire. That was the Roman way. So yes, we start seeing it a little bit in the Republic, but once there's a kind of hierarchical structure of power in which the emperor is kind of the guy in charge, there is this kind of uniformity that happens across the Roman Empire in terms of cities. And they're not wrong in as much as one way to keep your city that is 100 and 200 miles away from the capital, which is the city of Rome, how you keep a city, for example, further away than 200 miles in Syria happy is you provide clean water with aqueducts. You provide spaces for entertainment, like what we see in Rome called the Colosseum. You take that, what's called an amphitheater, and you build one in your imperial cities. You take the amenities, the recreation, and you bring that to the far reaches of your empire. Rome figured out, at least for a little while, that keeps people pretty happy. They don't want to take you down because you're actually providing some things that make their lives, whether Syria, France, Great Britain, wherever in the empire, make their lives comparatively more comfortable. So the final aspect of Rome that I want to just address briefly is its kind of association and inclusion into something called classical. So I bring back this portrait of Augustus, Emperor Augustus on the right, and I bring back that I just introduced you to, and now I'm going to bring back, I hope, an old friend, Spear Bear, to just remind you that Roman art, Roman culture, Roman architecture will have a very clear affinity with their counterparts in Greece. And what happens then centuries later with all of that fairly liberal borrowing that the Romans do from the Greeks, that by the 17th, 18th, 19th century, Greece and Rome just kind of get mushed into classical culture, or another term is antiquity. And so I'm simply putting this out here, not because we're going to explore this so much in our class. This becomes a bigger deal centuries later. But I did remind you or show you that, for example, in a relatively new country, the United States, there was an impulse in the early 1800s to design a bank that looked a lot like, well, in some ways, looked like the Parthenon. Likewise, in the same country. Thomas Jefferson will design his own house in Virginia, known as Monticello, and do so with a very conscious eye towards combining Greek and Roman elements. And in the case of Monticello, the inclusion of a dome is very much a kind of nod to Roman architecture. And again, we'll talk about a dome and the dome as a Roman invention in another lecture. So what I tried to do here is, because we do use Rome and Roman in so many contexts. It is a physical city. It was, and then it was a republic that kind of took over the Mediterranean, and then it was an empire that basically took over Europe, is to just kind of define our terms. And as we move through this material, try to keep straight that a lot of what we'll talk about is located in the city of Rome, but the influence, the far reach of Roman influence has everything to do with it first becoming a republic and then an empire, and then this thing that gets lumped in with ancient Greece. Okay, everybody, that's it for now. Bye-bye.